Welcome to the Monsters Among Us podcast. This is episode 19, UFO Evidence. We continue our talk about the missing 411 topic, and this time the focus is on UFO evidence. We're looking once again at the compelling and often unsettling work of David Paulides. He spent years investigating these really strange disappearances, particularly within our national parks and forests.
Yeah, and what's fascinating as we get into this is that Paulides didn't exactly start out looking for, paranormal stuff. His work really began because park rangers were talking to him.
Park rangers.
Right, rangers who had seen these weird patterns in missing person cases, details that just didn't fit the usual explanations, and they felt like they were being ignored.
So standard explanations weren't working for them.
Exactly. They noticed these incidents would get some local attention maybe, but then just fade away.
Right. And these rangers, seeing these recurring anomalies, these strange things happening around disappearances out in the wilderness, they felt the standard search and rescue, the usual explanations just weren't enough.
And when they tried to get more info, through official channels, dead ends.
So that's why they went to Paulides, hoping his background, his investigative skills might shed some light.
Precisely. And now his latest documentary, Missing 411, the UFO Connection, it puts forward a pretty, an extraordinary idea.
It is a huge claim, definitely.
It is. And Paulides himself, while he presents the evidence he's gathered, he does admit it's a big leap. Thinking about UFOs being involved in people vanishing in the woods,
Yeah.
it's a perspective that's kind of evolved from his earlier stuff, looking at other strange parts of these cases.
Exactly. And for people who followed his research, they'll know he started by looking at specific groups, right? Like those documentaries about young kids who disappeared and were found miles away, impossibly far, and then the one about experienced hunters vanishing in remote spots.
Yeah, those were baffling on their own.
So this UFO connection, it almost feels like the next step, maybe an unexpected one, but based on patterns he kept seeing and feedback he was getting.
Okay, so what was it then? What actually made Paulides even start thinking about a UFO link with these wilderness disappearances? It clearly wasn't where he began.
Well, it sounds like it was a few things coming together. He's mentioned having contacts in the UFO research world.
Right.
But a lot of it apparently came from listeners after he was on shows like Coast to Coast AM. People heard him talking about these wilderness cases.
And they reached out.
Yeah, suggesting, hey, have you considered UFOs? Based on their own ideas or maybe things they'd heard or seen.
Huh. That's interesting how sometimes that sort of anecdotal stuff, public input, can actually push research in a totally new direction.
Definitely.
Even ideas that seem way out there can, gain some ground if the patterns just don't fit anything else.
It wasn't just people disappearing that pushed him this way. He also started looking into some really weird animal cases. Abductions, you might call them, in the same areas.
Animal abductions, like cattle mutilation type things.
Yeah. Similar vein, maybe, but this was elk. He talked about this incident in Washington State. Workers apparently saw a UFO just lifting an elk. No ropes, no beams, nothing visible.
Wow. Just lifting an elk straight up.
Yeah. And MUSON, the Mutual UFO Network, they actually looked into it. That's a pretty wild claim to have out in the woods.
Okay, lifting an elk is strange enough, but you mentioned chronic wasting disease earlier. Was there a connection there?
Well, this is where it gets even more speculative. But yeah, that specific area in Washington, apparently it had a known issue with chronic wasting disease in the elk population.
CWD, that's that awful prion disease. Like mad cow, but in deer and elk. Fatal, neurological.
Exactly. So Paulides kind of floats the idea. Maybe these entities, whatever they are, have an interest in wildlife populations hit by diseases like CWD, maybe monitoring it.
It's a leap for sure, but it raises odd questions. Environmental monitoring by UFOs. This is out there.
It is. But that image, an elk, just silently lifted away. It kind of sets a strange tone for the human encounters he details, like those hunters in Idaho.
Ah, yes, the Idaho hunters. Tell us about that.
They apparently had this really close encounter. A huge, completely silent UFO just hovering right above the trees near their camp, deep in the wilderness.
Silent is a key detail that comes up a lot, isn't it?
Very much so. And what makes this Idaho sighting really relevant to the missing persons angle?
The location.
Exactly. It was near where a guy named Diorco vanished years before, a case Paulides had already documented.
Okay, so a cluster.
Yeah. And even more disturbingly, while they were filming this UFO documentary, crews actually found the remains of another hunter, someone who disappeared decades earlier in that same general area.
Decades. Wow. That's a serious cluster of weirdness in one spot. It reinforces that geographic pattern he talks about.
It really does. And it's that recurring thing. No sound, no tracks left behind, no sign of struggle, even if other people are just yards away in the woods.
Yeah, it's not like someone just got lost wandering off the path.
No, it's like they're just plucked out of the environment, gone.
And the lack of those normal signs. No calls for help, no footprints for the trackers, the dogs can't pick up a scent. It really pushes you to think beyond, a simple accident or getting lost.
Absolutely. Which leads us to maybe the most detailed and, frankly, bizarre account in the documentary, the 90-year-old hunter.
Oh, right, the one from back in the 70s. That story is something else. A direct encounter, deep in the woods, solo hunting trip.
Yeah, and the details are just strange. He describes seeing elk that looked like they were frozen, like statues, which is just not how elk behave.
Not at all. And then the rifle incident?
Right. He tries to shoot, and the bullet supposedly hits some kind of invisible barrier and just drops to the ground, right there in the forest.
That's physics-defying stuff. And then the being shows up.
Yep. A humanoid figure, weird clothes, offers him food, the classic close encounter.
Yep.
But then it gets even wilder. He says he was taken aboard a craft.
While he's out there in the middle of nowhere.
Exactly. And inside, he claims he saw those same elk, the frozen ones, just suspended somehow.
Suspended elk. Okay. And there was talk about resources.
Yeah, he said he overheard conversation about them taking elk, but also stuff from Earth's oceans, which, if true, is a pretty chilling potential reason for some animal disappearances.
And he saw Earth getting smaller. Like, they left the planet.
That's what he claimed, saw the Earth receding, and he even said there were other people on board. Looked like regular people from Earth.
Other people. Wow. Okay, but they brought him back. Why did he think they returned him?
This is maybe the strangest part. His vasectomy.
His vasectomy.
Yeah. He genuinely believed that because he'd had a vasectomy, he wasn't suitable for whatever their purpose was, maybe some kind of breeding program or biological sampling. That was his takeaway.
That is specific and unsettling. But how does that connect back to the other missing people patterns?
Well, Paulides points out this recurring theme. People being found in weird locations, places they couldn't have reached easily, sometimes missing clothes or their clothes are on wrong. It's like they were dropped back disoriented.
Abruptly returned after being gone.
Right. And this hunter, when he was returned, he wasn't just dropped off neatly. He injured his shoulder in the process.
Okay, so a rough return. But there was something else physical, too, wasn't there?
Yeah, this is maybe the most medically baffling part.
Yeah.
He'd had tuberculosis scars his whole life. After this encounter, they were gone. Completely vanished.
Scars just gone. How do you even explain that naturally?
I really can't. And add to that the weird bullet behavior and the fact that a psychologist and a polygraph examiner both assessed him as credible, believing he was telling the truth as he remembered it.
It makes you take the whole incredible story a bit more seriously, doesn't it? A first-hand account from deep in the wilderness that just breaks all the rules.
It really does. And stepping back to the bigger picture, the statistics Paulides presents are pretty stark. He estimates about 50% of the people who disappear in these specific wilderness circumstances never found.
Half. That's huge. Just vanishing from parks and forests.
Yeah. And of the ones who do come back, in his specific profile cases, only about 10% are found deceased.
So a lot of people reappear alive.
But the vast majority of those returnees have zero memory of what happened. Complete amnesia about their time missing, how they survived, how they got back.
That recurring amnesia is one of the most consistent and frankly creepiest elements. Like, time was just wiped.
Totally wiped. And you mentioned it before. Some come back naked or missing shoes or just specific items of clothing. No explanation.
Yeah.
Just gone from the wilderness and back, changed.
It's deeply strange. And there were other weird patterns too, right? Demographic ones?
Yes. This is another one that's hard to explain conventionally. He noticed in at least one cluster area, a significant number of the missing hunters shared German heritage.
German heritage. Specifically, why would that matter?
Who knows? But it gets even more specific. He also found that all the missing physicists he's researched fitting these strange disappearance profiles, also German.
Wait, all of them. Hunters and physicists, both German. That's statistically, that seems really improbable just by chance.
Highly improbable. Which leads back to that question. Why are some returned and others aren't? The old hunter's vasectomy idea is one possibility, maybe pointing to some kind of biological selection.
The selection process, which feeds into that, what did you call it, the ant farm idea.
Yeah, the ant farm of the galaxy. The disturbing thought that maybe Earth, Maybe humans, maybe specific humans in these wilderness spots are being observed, maybe sampled for DNA, certain traits being more interesting than others.
It's a very uncomfortable theory when you apply it to people vanishing from, their camping trip.
Definitely. And Paulides found another subgroup pattern too, people with pre-existing serious hereditary diseases going missing.
Right, which raises the question, how did someone potentially quite ill manage to travel miles into the wilderness, undetected, leaving no trace, before disappearing? It doesn't add up.
It really doesn't. Which brings us back again to that CWD, the chronic wasting disease connection.
Right, the elk taken by UFOs in areas where CWD was rampant in the elk population?
Yeah, it suggests, potentially, that these entities, if they exist, might be doing some kind of environmental monitoring, watching how diseases like that spread in the wild.
Monitoring prion diseases. It's a very specific, almost scientific-seeming potential motive, isn't it?
It is. And speaking of official responses, it's interesting how differently Canada and the U.S. seem to handle UFO reports, especially in these wilderness contexts.
How so?
Well, Paulides mentions the RCMP in Canada has protocols. They investigate UFO reports thoroughly, send reports up the chain to Ottawa. Some stuff even gets classified top secret.
Okay, so they take it seriously, officially.
Seems like it.
Yeah.
Whereas in the U.S., the impression is often more dismissive, especially from local law enforcement when it comes to sightings in parks or forests.
That difference probably affects how much information is even available to researchers like Paulides.
Absolutely. And he's definitely hit walls trying to get basic info, like lists of missing people from the National Park Service, the very places these things are happening.
They wouldn't provide lists.
Initially, no. Or they quoted him an insane amount of money, like $1.4 million for the lists.
$1.4 million for public records. That sounds like obstruction.
It certainly seems designed to deter investigation. He eventually got the Yosemite list, but only after he'd already researched and documented many of those cases himself. It raises questions about transparency for sure.
Definitely raises questions about what information might be held back regarding these wilderness cases.
And while his main focus is the wilderness, he did touch on disappearances in cities too. Remember the Sobering Coincidence book?
Young men vanishing from bars or parties found later in water, often with GHB involved, but the cause of death still unexplained sometimes.
Exactly. And he mentioned a coroner who actually acknowledged seeing similar unexplained cases in their own urban area.
So it's possibly not just a wilderness phenomenon, even if the patterns differ slightly?
Could be wider. And then Paulides brings in some really out-there concepts. Portals, multi-dimensions.
Whoa, okay. Like theoretical physics stuff.
Yeah, referencing work by physicist Dr. John Brandenburg, who's worked with NASA. The idea that maybe these disappearances aren't just about being physically moved, but maybe shifted somewhere else.
Dimensionally shifted. That's a huge concept. How would that even apply?
Well, I think about that case of Dale Staling in Mesa Verde National Park. People reportedly heard him crying for help. They were in the area, but they couldn't see him.
Heard but not seen. Like he was right there, but no.
Exactly. Could he have been somehow shifted, maybe into a parallel space or dimension, right there in the park? He was eventually found deceased years later in an area they'd already searched.
Found later in a searched area? That pattern comes up again and again.
It does. And think about that hunter in British Columbia. His clothes found neatly folded, way away from his camp. And then a SWAT team gets called in, but supposedly told not to search a specific area of the forest.
Restricted search areas. Folded clothes. Those details just scream high strangeness, not your typical lost hiker scenario.
Not at all. And the recurring undetermined cause of death on autopsy reports for people found in the wilderness. Or the missing clothes, or neatly folded clothes near the body. It all points away from simple explanations.
So with all this weirdness, does Paulides offer any, practical advice for people going into these areas, hikers, hunters?
He does, yeah. Pretty sensible stuff, actually. Carry a personal locator beacon, a
Wow.
PLB, that's crucial.
Makes sense. What else?
Energy bars, emergency blanket, flashlight, mirror, whistle, basic survival gear, and a reliable fire starter. He even mentions using dryer lint. Apparently it catches a spark really well.
Good tip. Anything else?
He recommends carrying a firearm and getting proper training. And he notes, statistically in his research, he hasn't found a case where someone had both a firearm and a PLB and still went missing under these weird circumstances.
Interesting correlation, and
Now-
the obvious one.
Tell someone where you're going, your exact plans, when you expect to be back. Basic safety, but vital.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's recap those common denominators he keeps finding in these wilderness cases.
Right. There's a list. Search dogs can't track the scent. Professional trackers find no prints.
Amnesia in victims who return alive.
Sudden, weird weather changes happening right around the time of disappearance.
Missing clothes or shoes, sometimes just one shoe.
Victims found in areas that were already thoroughly searched, sometimes multiple times.
Those point-of-separation incidents where someone vanishes almost instantly when briefly out of sight.
Unknown or undetermined cause of death, even when a body is recovered.
And the cluster zones, specific geographic areas where multiple disappearances occur.
Oh, and that eerie silence. People reporting the forest going completely quiet right before something strange happens.
It's a chilling list of anomalies, and he does address the more mundane explanations, right?
Yeah, he pretty much rules out serial killers or animal attacks for the vast majority of these specific cases he profiles. Just not enough evidence. No bodies in many cases, no signs of struggle, no predator signs consistent across the board.
Okay, let's touch on a couple more specific examples, maybe from Montana, since that area comes up. Aaron Hedges.
Right, Aaron Hedges. Disappeared in the Crazy Mountains, Montana, September 2014. Knew the area well, experienced outdoorsman.
What happened?
He was with someone. Their mules got spooked badly by something unseen. He radioed, he was going ahead towards Sunlight Lake, a specific destination. Then, nothing. Vanished.
In the search.
Intensive search. They eventually found his boots, his Calmback water bladder, and a water filter near a small fire pit. There was snow on the ground by then, but zero tracks leading away. No scent for the dogs after 2 weeks. They eventually had to call off the search. Just gone.
No tracks in snow. That's another tough one to explain conventionally. What about David Koch? Not Montana, but Vancouver.
David Koch, yeah. Grouse Mountain, Vancouver, May 2005. Wilderness area, right near the city. He was there on a business trip, liked the outdoors, took the tram up the mountain. They have video of him arriving at the top.
Okay, so confirmed he was there. Then what?
Then he disappeared. Almost immediately, the weather turned bad, which hampered the search efforts, another recurring theme.
And then they found him later.
13 days later, in a pool of water, in an area they had definitely searched before. Okay, found in a previously searched area. Any other weird details?
Yep. The medical examiner estimated his time of death was about 6 days after he disappeared, not right away. He was of German heritage. And again, no tracks, no signs of disturbance anywhere near where his body was found. Autopsy said hypothermia.
6 days later, where was he for the first week? And German heritage again.
Exactly. Then there's the tragic case of Jared Atwater, a 3-year-old boy.
Oh no, where was this?
Northern Colorado Wilderness Trail. He wandered off from a group. Some fishermen nearby apparently saw him but didn't intervene immediately, thinking someone was with him. He vanished. And found later.
His remains, just a skull cap. A few bones were found 4 years later, miles from the trail, deep in the wilderness.
A mountain lion, maybe.
That was the initial thought. But his shirt was found relatively intact near the bones. Experts looked at it, said there was no blood evidence consistent with a predatory animal attack. It didn't fit.
No blood, intact shirt. Doesn't sound like a typical mountain lion kill, especially for remains found years later.
No. And Morgenheimer, 22-year-old river guide in the Grand Canyon.
Experienced guide, familiar territory.
Very. He was guiding a tour, got separated briefly from the boats in a shallow part of the Colorado River. He was wearing a life preserver. He was close to other people. Vanished. Extensive search, helicopters, divers, everything. Absolutely no trace of him found. And again, Paulides notes his German descent.
Shallow water, life preserver, close to others, experienced guide, Grand Canyon, and just gone. It defies logic.
It really does. And, Paulides shares this anecdote. An Alaska state trooper, someone with years and years of search and rescue experience in really remote, wild places.
What did the trooper say?
Basically acknowledged that, yeah, the long-term SAR guys, they know these cases are weird. They see the patterns. They know something isn't right. But they're very hesitant to talk about it openly.
With an unofficial understanding among those on the ground that something unexplained is happening out there?
Pretty much. A quiet acknowledgement that the standard explanations don't cover everything they see in the parks and forests. So, yeah, we're left with all these baffling cases, these disappearances in our beautiful, wild places that just resist easy answers. The patterns Paulides has documented are hard to ignore.
They really are. The first-hand accounts, the lack of evidence for conventional causes, it really forces you to consider, well, less conventional ideas.
Including that very provocative possibility of UFO involvement in some of these wilderness mysteries.
When you look at the consistency, the dismissal of standard explanations, the sheer strangeness, you have to ask, what is going on in our parks and forests?
And if there's some kind of extraterrestrial connection, what does that even mean for us? It's a profound and frankly disturbing question to ponder.
Absolutely. It pushes the boundaries of what we think is possible.
If you want to really dig into the case files, the specific details, the evidence Paul Eid has put together over the years, we definitely recommend checking out his Missing 411 books and documentaries. They lay out these wilderness cases in meticulous detail.